All right, heading into the second round here, things get very interesting. If they're there, these are the guys. Number one, Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. Name that. I mean, you go back 2.5 weeks ago, this guy is probably a fringe second-round pick. Steelers got a really good shot at 51. You talk about it today, the Steelers might not have a shot at 20. Steelers go look at this and say, oh, we don't even get a second center's already off the board. That's how crazy this guy is. He is Mel Kiper's number 2 center. Mel Kiper says there's no chance he's going to go outside of the top 50. But if he's there, Zach Frazier is a name to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Second, cornerback out of Rutgers, Max Melton. This is a personal favorite of mine. This dude is a stud, and I think he's going to be unbelievable in the NFL. Wide receiver out of South Carolina, Xavier Legette, a name that I think is a sleeper when it comes to the Steelers' second-round pick, and a name that the Steelers could have a lot of interest in. Defensive tackle out of Florida State, Braden Fisk, who, again, 2 months ago, you go to the NFL Combine, this guy's a third-round pick. Now you're looking at him as a potential mid-second-round pick out of Florida State. And then Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona, guy who could go in the first round, but it kind of depends on how everything else falls. You look at this board, I think obviously Zach Frazier highlights it, but who else on this list really entices you?
Yeah, I would say Melton, kind of obvious because he's kind of our second guy in this group. But if they go the way that I think they're going to go, Frazier's not even going to be a consideration, not only because he won't be there, but because they're already going to have a center. So I think they're going to kind of look past Frazier a little bit, depending on how they go in that first round. And I think Melton, I think corner is kind of your second, or it's arguably your third biggest need. But I think Melton, like you said, it's one of your favorites. But I think a guy who's going to rise quickly, and I think it's a guy who's, if he's at 51, it's not making it much past 51. So if you want him, if you want a good corner that you can trust and one that has some NFL-ready capabilities, I'd go with Melton.
Yeah, I think what excites me about Melton is this guy could play inside, he could play outside immediately. You could look at him and say he is a starter, whether we move Dante Jackson inside or they keep Melton in the inside and keep Jackson on the outside. I just think he provides instant starter capabilities for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a name that is going to grow into something crazy. Like, I have such high hopes for Max Melton. It's wild. I would go Max Melton over Nate Wiggins, if we're going to be honest. If somebody said pick a corner in the NFL draft, I'm going Max Melton over Nate Wiggins. Zach Frazier, obviously. Xavier Legette is a name that I think if he's there, the Steelers could consider, hey, this dude might just be too special at 51. If this wasn't such a loaded draft class, you have to go. He's probably going earlier. And I think the Steelers could view him as a second-round pick with so much upside out of South Carolina that maybe they just don't pass him up. They don't take a risk there. Go ahead.
Oh no, I mean I didn't have anything. I think Leggett would be a nice addition. I feel like that's your wide receiver too. I mean, anyone I think you kind of pick in this range is your day one wide receiver too, and it just has such great. He's not exactly a George Pickens copy, but just imagine having two massive 6'3", 6'4" wideouts on either side of your offense. I think Arthur Smith would really love that.
Yeah. So sticking with this is 51 realistic options on the big board, names that we could see the Steelers land if they do not move from 51. A lot of wide receivers. We have trends with each pick, and I think it's clear of what category or what position is going to be heaviest with each selection in the first 3 rounds. To highlight this list, starts it off with Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Florida, a name that, a lot of excitement around that name. Malachi Corley, wide receiver out of Western Kentucky. The Pittsburgh Steelers seem to love this guy, have shown a ton of interest in Malachi Corley, plus they love their small school guys. Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan, a guy that went in the second round to you in the Steelers mock draft today. Another center, Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia, a name that I think is a sleeper on the Steelers board, but it kind of depends on where the board has fallen. And then this is a name. This is a name that is sneakily climbing up the draft board that the Steelers might consider if he is there, and that is Michigan cornerback Mike Sandristil. I definitely didn't pronounce that name right, but I've been watching him. A little 5'10" guy, could play outside, probably best suited inside. Has made a lot of noise recently, probably climbing within the first 2 rounds of the draft after being earlier in the offseason. Names on here that if you were the Steelers, obviously you're thinking Roman Wilson, but what name, if available, is the best name for the Steelers?
Yeah, obviously I think it's Wilson. I think Wilson is kind of the the most reliable NFL ready guy. I think that's what they need. But I'm really interested in Sam Ristel from Michigan. You brought him up when we were going over this big board. It was kind of the first time that I had heard of him, and I think it's really impressive. I think he's got some nice tape. He's a really good athlete. And then, like you said, that inside outside versatility. Like I think that's something that the Steelers need in any cornerback that they draft this year, because that slot corner is an issue, but also you're looking for someone who I think could eventually move to the outside and be that long-term pair with Joey Porter Jr. So if you think Sam Rousseau can be it, I would go for that over a wide receiver, quite honestly. Like I think if you can find a corner who can set you up for not just this year, but moving well forward, I think in my mind that's a little more valuable than a wide receiver here.
Yeah, so I agree. I think the corners that could be available at 51 might just be too good to pass up for the Steelers. That you could look at it and just say, look, if Max Melton's there, if Sam Still's there, like these are guys that, yeah, awesome. There are a lot of good wide receivers, but there's still a lot of good wide receivers. Whereas in the corners that are available now probably aren't available in round 3, and the drop-off might be a little bit more significant. These are guys that can make an impact immediately in day 1. Now, I will say this. If we go center, if the Steelers go center in round 1, corner / wide receiver in round 2, that's no offensive tackle. Is that an okay move for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think they can get away with it. It's maybe not ideal, but I also think that, I don't know, tackle's a position where I think you can get away with drafting a bit of a project, someone who maybe needs a little bit of work. Like, I get it, Dan Moore's not ideal, but you've got bigger needs elsewhere, and I think you're just going to have to live with the idea that you're not going to get a tackle before the 3rd round or something like that. That you're not going to get a guy who might be starter capable right away. Like you're going to have to be patient with it a little bit, and so that's kind of just the place that I'm in with the Steelers as far as tackles go.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if all of your guys of all the positions of need, as crazy as it sounds, left tackle might be the one that I'm like, okay, look, if you need to, you could start Dan Moore Jr. You don't feel good about it, but if you need to, you can do it. And that's a spot to be for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ricky Pearsall is the name on this list that really, really excites me, but I just think that that's because the upside there is wild. And I think that kid could turn into so much more than maybe his draft stock says it is, with how twitchy and good of a route runner he could possibly be. Here's some fallback options for you. Andrew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. Defensive tackle Mason Smith out of LSU. Kyrie Jackson, big corner out of Oregon. Luke McCaffrey. I mean, you talking NFL bloodlines and some real good ones. This is one. Wide receiver out of Rice, and then Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of North Carolina. Of all those, if you did not make a trade, if the Steelers sat there at 51, what would be your name of, okay, I feel the most comfortable with the Steelers selecting this name in the 2nd round?
Of all our guys or our fallback guys?
Our fallback guys.
Oh, Mason Smith. I think Mason Smith would be. I think that's a guy that you cannot pass up. If he's the actually, I take that back. I'm going Andrew Phillips. Actually, I think he's kind of the name. Smith, I feel like they could still get in the 3rd round. Phillips, I think, is less and less likely the longer you wait, and corner's a bigger need. So I'm going with Phillips. Actually, final
yes.
Answer.
So I agree. I think Phillips is so underrated in this draft. I think he is a stud. He does not let you catch the football. I'm a big fan of Andrew Phillips. I think he gives me, I don't know, maybe better Mike Hilton vibes, as crazy as that sounds. I think he could play inside and outside. He's a name that's going to be super physical right off of the bat, matches Joey Porter Jr.'s physicality. I like Andrew Phillips, big fan of him. Mason Smith would probably be number 2 on this list. Kyrie Jackson, I could agree with, depending on where the rest of this draft goes. If the Steelers have a plan for everywhere else and they're just like, look, at Kyrie is just a big physical guy who we're just going to see what happens. Okay, if that's your one risk in this draft, okay. I think he's a major risk, though. I'm not totally sold on him. Andrew Phillips, Mason Smith, no doubt about it.